Burnout. Although everyone is talking about this modern condition, most people are not aware of what burnout really is, and its consequences for its victims. In order to find out more about burnout, we have invited Dr. Martin Otto, an expert and coach who treats and helps individuals and patients who are suffering from the syndrome. What can you tell us about burnout? How does it happen?
Well, I would like at the beginning of the interview to clarify something. The most individuals who are suffering from the burnout syndrome are not really classified as patients in a medical sense. This leads often to large difficulties in society's understandings of the burnout syndrome, because individuals who are actually suffering from a serious medical condition, such as depression, often use the excuse of the burnout syndrome in order to avoid being viewed as medically ill. That is exactly the problem for many people who are suffering from a psychological illness and decide to go to a coach to help them through their difficulties. For them, this is not the way to get help. These patients require adequate stationary or ambulant psychiatric or psychological treatment. The coach can help individuals who start having burnout problems in the workplace, which may have also impacted other areas in their daily lives. The coach works together with these individuals to develop a concept which allows them to get back on track.
I remember in the 80s that many people were talking about having a midlife crisis. Today it seems to me that I only hear about the burnout syndrome. Everyone is saying that they're burned out. As an unqualified observer, it seems to me like we may be having a burnout epidemic. Would you care to comment on that?
First, I would like to say something about your comment on the wave of midlife crises in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. In that case, we were talking primarily about well-established family fathers, typically with higher incomes, who wanted to break out of their daily existence. They left their families, typically for a younger so-called trophy wife, and established second families. That is what I associate with midlife crisis. I would like to say that this situation is now so commonplace that the term midlife crisis is practically no longer in use. When we think that 40% of marriages end in divorce, this is such a common occurrence that everyone has gotten used to this situation. It is a good example of how a new trend in society can be named and then forgotten as it becomes the new normal. In contrast, when we talk about the term burnout, whereby I would like to keep the definition relatively narrow, I would not disagree that we are experiencing a kind of epidemic. Previously, you talked about trendy illnesses or conditions in society. In my opinion, this new burnout trend lies in the enormous changes which we've experienced in our working environments in the previous decade. Daily working processes are becoming ever more complex. We talk more and more about multitasking, in which people are required to perform extremely difficult tasks in a shorter period of time. Today, employees have to be able to accomplish multiple jobs successfully. Everyone has to be able to do everything all of the time, and therefore it is not surprising that they feel stressed and underqualified or burned out. This development has now become almost mainstream, and thus there are ever more employees who are suffering from this situation.
The modern working place and the speed of change are evidently the causes of burnout. What can you do to help those people who cannot or don't want to live with this situation?
We can recognize burnout in that the individual is not only frustrated or stressed in the working environment, but that the symptoms have carried over into their daily lives. This situation can lead to a downward spiral which takes the joy out of life. Personally, I sometimes describe burnout as a form of relationship cancer. We can describe ourselves as social animals who live and take nourishment from our social networks. When the problems on the job start to impact our essential relationships with our spouses and our other family members and friends, we suffer immensely from the burnout condition. People suffering from burnout tend to withdraw and isolate themselves from their most important relationships and think exclusively about their problems at work. This continuous focus on work problems is unproductive and leads to a vicious circle which ends in an ever-increasing level of stress. At this point, it becomes extremely important to get support to deal with the problem. In other words, this is the right time to consult a coach. The coach must first perform a very exact analysis of the personal situation of the burnout victim. The better he understands the individual's problems and environment, the more he is able to provide the necessary support and advice. Within this analysis, the workplace has to be studied in detail in order to provide advice on how to streamline work processes and remove potential obstacles. At the same time, it is just as important to support the individual in the environment outside of the job. Unfortunately, burnout victims tend to exhibit negative and sometimes self-destructive behavior beyond the job, such as addiction, whereby I don't necessarily mean only alcoholism, but other forms of addiction such as increased consumption of nicotine or watching television late into the evening, sitting for hours in front of the computer, or continuously checking emails without any reason. This begins a negative behavior pattern from which these individuals suffer and which they cannot break out of, although they very often understand their situation and would like to stop their self-destructive behavior. This is the time when the coach works with the individuals to help them stop their behavior, and when it is important that the changes can be sustained beyond the coaching session.
Are there specific characteristics of individuals who are more susceptible to suffer from the burnout syndrome?
You can certainly say that there are specific personal traits which potentially lead to burnout. As you can imagine, people who tend towards perfectionism, in which everything has to be 100%, have to deal with daily limitations and stress because they always feel that their work is not good enough. At the same time, individuals who want to overachieve in their jobs are more susceptible. The burnout syndrome was first described by Freudenberger in his Medical Personnel. They had to work above normal levels over several years and were in a permanent state of exhaustion. What I believe is important in combination with an individual's personality is that many people on their journey through life have forgotten who they are and what is important for them, what their real values are. Their goals and motives have been co-opted by their working environments. In this case, we cannot underestimate the role of society. Many people speak today about a society which only values success. I say that we are not a success-driven society, but a performance-driven society. For example, there are individuals who perform incredibly important services at a high level of commitment, such as caregivers in a senior's home, who don't earn very much. And then, of course, there are other individuals who accumulate immense wealth without any significant effort or contribution to society. This situation, combined with the fact that we in society measure someone's worth based on their employment position, plays a huge role in which the fear of losing a job leads to a sort of existential angst and a potential burnout situation.
You have told us that an individual should first find a coach after it is clear through a medical examination that there is not a significant illness. What is the next important step in finding a coach to help after it has been determined by a psychologist that the individual is not clinically depressed? How can the affected person get into contact with you as a coach? What concrete help will you offer? How will the individual experience your support?
My work is absolutely customized based on the needs and situation of my clients. I find it positive that my clients can terminate my services at any time if they feel that they are not being helped, because they are paying out of their own pocket and it's not from their health insurance.
That means your coaching is also based on a performance principle?
Absolutely, based on the performance principle, which I feel is only right and appropriate for coaches. If I can refer back to the Freudenberg clients, most of the people I work with on burnout syndrome also come from the health professions. These individuals are ready to help others and have a certain selflessness as a personality trait. In short, if you are selfless, there is less of yourself. The first step in the coaching process is to find a way back to understanding yourself, to see, what do I want? Where am I going with my life? And not, what do other people expect of me? What are the expectations of my working colleagues? What are the expectations of my surroundings? What are the expectations of my neighbors? And I find in my sessions with my clients that there are significant changes in their behaviors and that these changes result in a different perspective on their situation, something we work on together. And if you ask yourself why changes in perspective are important, then think about going to a sporting event. If you are on the edge of the field, you have a totally different view than at the top of the stands. You have two totally different views of the game. My objective as a coach is to provide the individual with as many different perspectives on the situation as possible. When you are stuck in the position of a burnout victim, you often have no other perspectives which would allow you to find alternatives to your current behavior. Very often you ignore the well-intentioned advice and suggestions from friends and family. The individual is frozen in his perspective, and the point of coaching is to win back flexibility. Another important aspect is to live in the present. I know that it sounds easy and that when we see people on TV, we often hear that this or that person says that they live for today. But most people simply do not do it. It is important to live in the present. When you're going for a walk, not to think about what is going to be for dinner. When you're sitting at dinner, not to think about what emails you might have received. When you read your emails, not to think about what you're going to watch on TV. We very often live in our heads with a constant jump back and forth between either the past and the future, and it prevents us from living in the present. It is interesting. Only a small number of people are able to think about nothing for over 10 seconds.
That's also something that I'm often unable to do.
Yes, you are certainly not alone.
You were active for many years as a psychologist and psychiatrist. What is the difference between your previous profession and your current job as a coach?
Well, a psychologist or a psychiatrist treats a set of medical patients according to a prescribed therapeutic method within our healthcare system. In contrast, a coach is a service provider that does not work according to therapeutic principles, but with modules to assist the client to achieve behavioral changes in a shorter period of time.
However, your training as a psychologist is in any case a necessity, and of course speaks to your quality as a coach. Or could I call myself a coach?
Coach is not a registered trademark or profession. It is certainly the case that individuals with many years of experience in helping people with problems, for instance, pastors, social workers, and other people-oriented professions, have advantages in this job. The disadvantage is certainly, as you mentioned, that anyone could call themselves a coach, and therefore there is no guarantee of quality.
When you go online today, the ability to identify an unqualified individual who claims to be a coach must be extremely difficult.
If you do not know what characteristics to use to evaluate a potential coach, it is difficult to separate the charlatans from the professionals.
Do you have a tip for our viewers?
Yes, a test session is always helpful in evaluating a coach. The important criteria are that the coach takes the necessary time to get to know you as an individual, is well prepared, and asks the right questions.
That means that there is a longer interview process between the coach and the affected person or a patient.
Yes, as I already mentioned, we are not talking about patience in a coaching process. The length of the coaching depends on the client's requirements. If the clients say they feel better and they can get along by themselves, then of course it should be accompanied with an improvement in their behavior. If behavioral problems reoccur, the coach will usually offer to provide additional assistance. In most cases, a coaching lasts 10 to 20 hours. In comparison, psychotherapy is usually a significantly longer time period.
The difference is that you do not offer a cure, but that you provide new perspectives which allow a successful re-entry into the working place, although it may just be as stressful.
I try to ensure that the individuals are less stressed with their environment after the coaching and that they feel more satisfied with their lives.
Even in their previous jobs?
That depends. There are situations where the client has to remain permanently away from their working place. For instance, if there was a significant amount of mobbing. You cannot always create an environment in which the person will be happy on the job. There are situations where the clients simply have to quit their employment. And that is where the coaching also helps, to identify those situations where it's not possible to return to their jobs. In conclusion, there are two stories which I would like to share with you. First, there is a type of burnout condition which ends unfortunately in death. You sometimes see it in the obituaries. It is exemplified by an old German saying, "Work was his life, he never took care of himself, only serving others was his highest duty." Unfortunately, in that situation, I can only say the person has wasted his life. And the other story is a more positive burnout condition. One of the oldest German fairy tales about a group of animals who no longer are able to do their jobs and are scheduled to be slaughtered by their owner. They run away to start something new because they have decided there's something better than death. They start a street band in Bremen and live happily ever after. I know the same situation where individuals throw in the towel on a previous stressful existence and start something totally new and worthwhile, in a totally new direction with a high level of creativity and energy, a change that really lets those individuals lead a happy existence. I can only say that we can all take courage from these positive changes, which sometimes come quite late in life. In short, it's never too late to make a new start.
Thank you for coming in to see us today. That was very interesting.